So I'm chilling here with my dead, trusty workstation and gaming computer, thanks to the all-in-one radiator failing as it's clearly falling out. And as I was looking for a replacement, I realized, is water cooling even effective anymore? So we've all probably heard the classic reasons as to why you water cool a computer, right? Especially if it's your trusty gaming workstation rig and you're going to be putting it under intense load in which you need the best temperatures possible. So you buy a water cooler, right? You buy a classic all-in-one water block since you're too lazy to bend plastic tubes with a hairdryer. And also Corsairs came with a warranty if they damage my parts. So I've been going with Corsair radiators for about the past 11 years. Now, just because this logic was true in 2009 when I started, and was true in 2014 and 2017 when I built this rig originally, doesn't mean it's necessarily true now. Now, there have always been beefy gaming fan radiator setups to cool your computer with. However, they weren't necessarily better at the time. Furthermore, when you're building a computer, you just want that flex factor, right? You want this to look cool, you want these industrial tubing, you want these massive braided tubes running to a huge heat sink that will just line the top of your case with massive cooling power. However, as I thought about it more and as I've dealt with AIOs over the years, I've realized that I have been spending about $100 to $200 every 3 years to replace a failed radiator. There's so many ways to get out of a warranty claim, especially for these major companies. Parts fail in so many different ways. And furthermore, whenever you run a computer with an AIO cooler, you do run the risk of it leaking from one of these tube nozzles in some way or running into the CPU onto your precious graphics card, which unless you have vertically mounted, is probably going to be configured like mine, in which anything that leaks here will hit your motherboard, it will hit your Nvme, it will hit your, I have a 1080 Ti in this case, and it can even drip down to your power supply. So effectively, you run the risk of shorting your entire computer every time you run a water cooling loop. Now the chances are super slim, and companies that are good like Corsair generally honor their warranties on replacing all of your parts that it's damaged if it immediately does it. However, that doesn't mean that these parts don't fail eventually. In the case of my first one, which was just a classic OEM Aztec liquid cooling loop, it just evaporated. That's what these things do after about 4 to 6 years. They just run out of cooling power, and I actually still have that cooler running in my old computer back in another house, but that's not my go-to rig. So in this bad boy, which I built in 2017, we have a i7 7700K. We have 16 gigs of RAM because memory was super expensive back to a natural disaster at the time I built this computer. And we have it in a nice, my classic favorite case, the Fantex Enthoo Evolve, with decent radiator, decent cooling, and we've got a bunch of storage on the back. And this has been my go-to production, gaming, coding rig, whatever I need to do in Windows, I do on this computer. If you see my other videos though, you probably know I use a Mac, which I have hidden behind the computer. Alright, so let's actually go back to the story of how this liquid cooler died. So, I woke up in the morning and my girlfriend was like, why is your computer gurgling and making so many loud noises? And when you hear your computer gurgling, your immediate reaction when you know you've liquid cooled your computer is, oh crap, the liquid cooler is leaking. Fortunately for me, the liquid cooler wasn't leaking. However, what did happen through debugging, which you debug a radiator by taking the computer and shifting it so that the liquid flows in a different orientation, is basically this started evaporating, or this did have a slow leak, which there were some marks on the motherboard and graphics card's protective shroud that indicated this could have leaked a little bit, but essentially what happens is this thing stops having the coolant running through it, bubbles form, there's air gaps, evaporation is occurring through some manner of heat dissipation, liquid heat dissipation. This thing doesn't have the cooling power that it used to. So I opened up Cupid hardware monitor and confirmed that indeed my temperatures were running a bit hot. At idle, this was hitting 70 Celsius on the 7700K, which this thing at idle should not be running that hot. So my immediate reaction was, well, I have the fans. I have triple 120mm fans up here. I have enough power in the front with 140 case fans. Why not get some nice, super powerful liquid cooler like the NZXT X73 Kraken. That cools probably the best of any CLC AIO today on the market. It looks nice, it has some information there instead of just the classic heat trap and Corsair logo. Let's try it with a different brand, change it up. Well, what I learned in my research involving that radiator was that it actually is prone to failure even more often than my current radiator. It has DRM, in which that it can't properly thermal throttle the fans and adjust the RPMs unless you're connected to the internet using CAM by NZXT or some specific software. And I just didn't want to deal with all of these wires coming from the radiator. I didn't want to deal with, proprietary DRM software. I didn't want to deal with the possibility of leaking. And furthermore, just spending $200 every 3 years on failing radiators is kind of a lot. So I did the unthinkable for someone that likes to flex with their computer, and I decided to look at some air-cooled systems for my CPU. And lo and behold, Noctua has now released a beautiful Promax Black Edition CPU cooler. This wasn't available when I first built the computer. It was either sold out or just didn't exist, but I knew that Noctua existed. I knew that Noctua made great fans. Likewise, Be Quiet exists, and they make all Blackout Edition hardware too. But I've heard rumors of Be Quiet's fans having some issues with inaudible frequencies. And I trust Noctua's build. I've used their classic, horrible, ugly, whatever you want to call it, industrial tan, brown, purple shades before in some workstation rooms. And that got me thinking, if we're cooling industrial grade hardware for intense distributed systems, server farms, professional things, we're not cooling it with custom liquid cooling loops or even like Corsair, NZXT, name your brand, closed liquid cooling loops. We're cooling it with air fan solutions from companies that are known to have parts that don't fail even after 10 or 15 years of running it. So I decided to hop over to my trusty preferred vendor, buy one of these, and let's give it a shot. Along the way, also, I realized that there's just some things about this build that were bugging me that I wanted to fix. My cable management is pretty atrocious, but my cables got back ordered due to COVID. So here instead, I have a proper M2 SSD mounting kit. I have a Anti-Sag Gpu Bracket, because if you can tell, this GPU should be up here, and it's actually sagging quite a lot. And then lastly, I have another 16 gigs of RAM because it's dumb cheap now. And let's be real, 16 gigs in 2020 is kind of the bare minimum now when you're building a system. So I bought some identical RAM to what I bought 3 years ago for like 50 bucks. It's another 16 gigs. And we are going to slap that in this computer now too. Lastly, before I get people upset at me saying that water cooling is essentially dead in 2020, let me run through all of the products that are available at this time when I was considering this, right? I could have bought another Corsair, I could have bought a larger Corsair, I could have bought a thermal take, I could have bought a custom EG loop, I could have bought the NZXT loops. And from most well-known reputable review companies, I will say that NZXT Kraken does have slightly better thermals. However, when I pulled up the decibel chart, this Noctua fan right here, it specs its max acoustical noise is 24.6 decibels. The Kraken runs at about 32 to 36. My personal one was running at about 40. And now, off the top of my head, every 3 decibels is essentially a doubling of audible volume to the human ear. So essentially, these closed loop liquid cooling loops are generally 3 to 5 times louder to the human ear. You'll hear the pump rather than just fan noise, which your computer has fans anyway, you're not going to get around that. The fan noise will just be more passive and imperceptible to the human ear. This originally didn't matter to me when I first built the rig because I put the computer under my desk actually, which a lot of friends have thrown shade at me for, but I prefer to have it under my desk. It's on some hardwood floor, it doesn't get dusty, I have plenty of fan protectors, and it's just all around work for me. So that doesn't matter to me too much, but the gurgling was super loud. It was audible from my bedroom with a closed door. It was just getting annoying. So for people that are concerned from a specification level, purely talking like on paper, not getting into warranty or lifespan or longevity of the product or other, thermal specific things with radiator designs that you can tweak or overclocking. We see that this Noctua, this ran me about $90. It has a lower max acoustical noise. It has a lower input power. Its rotational speed is lower too, so the fans itself will be running slower than these Corsair ones were running to power this radiator. The cost is about half of what one of those new NZXT Krakens would have cost me, and thermal performance wise, by Celsius, this runs many degrees cooler than my H100 IV2 did, and it runs only about 2 Celsius hotter than what the best Kraken with a triple fan setup, costing $180 will run you. So, if you're in a country that has this at $90 or less like it's been running on Amazon, there's really no reason to not pick one up and try it if you've been running AIO your whole life. Thus, that's what I've decided to do, and for this video, I figured I would just talk about why I did that, and let's just get to building this PC otherwise. Alright, so you can see here, this is my beautiful old PC build. I am obviously not Nvme Ssd, and I don't have a beautiful camera rig, so these are going to be the best shots you get of B-roll footage of a computer sitting in my kitchen. But anyway, this is the Noctua that I have purchased. This is what we're going to be installing today in this rig, and I will just now do a time lapse of me swapping out the parts and fixing up this computer a bit. Alright, so the first thing that we have to do is take out this whole hunk of metal. So here I have a random crappy screwdriver, and we're just going to uninstall it. And yeah, so for context, I've been building computers since I was a kid. Back when Heroes of Newerth, Dota, StarCraft, World of Warcraft were kind of the big hype games out that I was playing. Here we just see that my bootleg NVMe held in by a little twisty tie just popped out, so I'll take that out for now. But yeah, I got my first computer from a company called Digital Storm back in that era. If you can't build your own computer, or you don't have the time to, or the capacity, or for whatever reason, you want to buy a pre-built gaming computer, I will not shame you. Digital Storm is my go-to brand. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really appreciate what they did for me and how they helped me out as a kid with no knowledge of computer parts. I even had one of my graphics cards catch fire due to the StarCraft 2 graphics bug. And Digital Storm was super willing to replace it and even upgrade me to a nicer EVGA card at the time. And since then, I basically just kept building computers. I've decided that buying PCs wasn't worth it. I would just keep building desktops. And furthermore, it's just pretty fun actually. It's like adult Legos, like very expensive adult Legos. So here we can see that I've gotten the cooler off. There's a micro USB for the PWM fan controller or whatever. And then here we have another 4-pin adapter, which I'm going to unplug both ends from with my beautiful cable management. And here we go. The broken heatsink is off. No more gurgling will hopefully happen. I don't want to get that liquid metal anywhere, so I might actually wrap that in some plastic real quick. Alright, so now I've tossed that cooler off into an Amazon box with some saran wrap. Let's get to removing these unnecessary cables from my rig. I have here this micro USB plugged into this fan controller down here, so I'm just going to start unthreading that. And yeah, currently, I don't know, I'm not playing anything too intensive. I'm just playing a lot of Valorant, playing some Red Dead Redemption 2 now that I finally have it on PC. I'm going to be checking out Fall Guys and some other games with friends on Steam. So nothing that this computer, needs a whole overhaul for. I'd probably make a video when I get like the RTX 3000 series. But just felt worth at the time to upgrade the computer a little bit since RAM prices are cheap, and especially since my computer is starting to overheat idling. We have some thermal paste on the computer, but it's been looking pretty good because I do apply this decently regularly. So let's first get this NVMe back in. I have here my trusty 1TB Nvme Ssd from Samsung, a 970 EVO Plus. My computer runs entirely Samsung SSDs. I've just been a fanboy for them for absolutely no reason. So that's what I put back into this. We are going to put that into my motherboard's correct slot here. And see how it kind of bounces out, if you can see that on camera. My motherboard didn't have any spare screws, so I had to buy this $10 kit of mounting screws for Nvme SSDs. Alright, so it looks like we need a mounting post screw, which is interesting. So I'm going to try to get this microscopic screw onto the screwdriver so you can see it. This here is the actual threading post screw, and that will feed into this little hex screw that will be a mounting post screw for our Phillips head screw. Alright, so might have to actually take the SSD out real quick. That went into the very end post here. So we actually will just thread this in by hand, it looks like. Now, the thing I hate about here is I'm probably just going to fat finger this entire thing. So bear with me. Alright, so I finally got that into the mounting post. Now we're just going to screw it in by hand. And what this screw does is it's just a spacer so that the SSD doesn't sit entirely flush to the board, but it's a little bit off so that it's not held in at an angle that could potentially damage the connector over time or bend the... Alright, so now with this teensy little screwdriver in hand, we are going to install the Nvme SSD back into the computer. Boom, that was easy. The parts are in. Now we save this entire bag of screws that I have all of these excess for no reason. And we will move on to installing the RAM. So this RAM, at the time, I guess I bought 3000 megahertz in a 2x8 configuration. I know that a 2x8 configuration isn't ideal anymore, especially now that we're doing 4x8 to get 32 gigs of RAM, but alas, that's what we're doing, so let's install this. Again, this isn't really the best build in the world. This is just what I personally work off of. I've built nicer computers for friends. I'll be building a computer again for a friend upcoming that I'll probably do a real build video for, but this is just what I work with. It's pretty cheap. All of these mods and accessories for this incremental upgrade and fixing my broken AIO comes out to less than $150. I've got my non-RGB RAM, which means it's going to be atrociously slow because RGB, especially red, makes everything faster. But this is what we're working with. Let's put that in and fill up all of those excess RAM slots. Okay, and push down until you hear a click. What we're going to move on to now is I ordered the Anti-Sag Gpu Bracket. We are going to install this now. This lettering is a little bit big and obnoxious, but I'll just leave it here for now. I might black it out eventually. But what this came with was some mounting screws. I'm not sure if the mounting screws are needed, but instead we have these adjustable end caps for how much we want to raise the GPU that I will definitely be using. And then otherwise, I'm just going to unscrew the actual brackets that my GPU is mounted in and then slap this bad boy in. Alright, so you now should be able to see the GPU here. It's still sagging, but we have the bracket at least mounted in place here. Now what I'm going to do is I think I might need this bigger grommet here to boost the GPU up. So we can just, it's a rubber piece that we can just slide up here. And then the GPU rests on it. Seems a little flimsy, actually. There's another 0.2 that I can add another one of these on. So I'll add that in on the middle and slide it over to the second fan.
5 hours later.
Yeah, this other piece just doesn't fit anywhere on. So that's a bit of a disappointment. But otherwise, that's the best I can do to avoid the GPU from sagging any further. All right, so now it's time to install the actual start of the show, the Noctua AIO. Alright, so opening this up, I have here a bunch of parts for installing this. I have the actual fan and radiator set up here, and then I also have some fans. So let's get to installing this. I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so we see that this doesn't have any thermal paste pre-applied, but I believe the other box includes some to use. Alright, so as you can see now the Noctua is installed, but I am exhausted. I cut the cameras to finish the installing of some of these wires up here, and then down into this little tiny gap here, and this tiny gap up here for the motherboard fan headers, so that this Noctua can get powered. This is a really rough install to do in a case. I highly recommend you do this when you are building the computer for the first time. But since we're doing it inside the case, wasn't too bad. Gonna try this out and report back in the next video.